So, welcome back, everybody, to the Real Talk Uncensored podcast. Today, our guest is Linda. Oh my gosh, it's Linda Ganster. How you doing today, Linda?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So one of the first questions I want to ask you is just asking about who you are and kind of how you ended up at the Found Youth in a way, and kind of just talk about your life a little bit.
Okay. I got to know Caprice about 2 years ago while I was working for Kendall Hunt. I was heading up the Paradigm Education Solutions Division, and one of the things that that group does is work with in the correctional environment. And Kendall Hunt has a partnership with Fountain of Youth, printing the workbooks. So it was kind of a natural connection. I met with Caprice a couple of times. Was really taken by what he's doing here. And this past summer, I went out on my own to start up a business as providing business mentorship for nonprofits. And I started talking to Caprice about how I might be able to help. I started attending sort of separately, but coincidentally started attending Real Talk and was so, I don't know, buoyed by the hope and the commitment of people that come and the difference that the program can make in their lives. It was inspiring for me at a time when I was trying to figure out my third act. And so things just sort of came together in a really natural way, and I've continued to attend Real Talk at the same time, provide some services to the Fountain of Youth to help achieve long-term sustainability and growth so that it can continue to help people way on into the future. I am fairly new to the area. I've only been in, my husband and I lived in Galena, moved to Galena in 2018. So I've lived all over, but I now live in Cassville, Wisconsin, and this is the place that we intend to call home for the rest of our time. So it's been very important to me to kind of network into the community and give back.
Gotcha. Well, I love to hear how you're helping with the Found Youth and to make it last forever, hopefully, because this is a great program. How come you decided to do what you do and help nonprofits?
Well, one of the things that I have been interested in my entire working career is emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. I went back just for my own sake, my own sanity, about 15 years ago and got a master's in conflict analysis and resolution. And probably a year or so ago, I got involved with an organization called 6 Seconds. They're a nonprofit. They're the largest nonprofit in the world devoted to emotional intelligence. And I really like the work of 6 Seconds because it's very competency and skills based. And I began to take my courses with them. I got certified as an assessor and a practitioner in emotional intelligence. And so the threads again just sort of came naturally together as I looked at how I could take. That's always been my personal passion. I've done lots of other things for work, mostly in higher education publishing, but kind of the thread through it was I always was interested in this idea of emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. And so when I started figuring out what I was going to do in this next chapter, I was looking first at doing training in emotional intelligence and leadership coaching and that sort of thing. But the more I got involved with Caprice, and it sort of at the same time, Fountain of Youth had lost their donor development person. And Caprice started talking to me about, come do donor development. I said, that's not what I want to do. Kind of, here's what I want to do. And it has evolved from there. So, and like many great startups, both for-profit and nonprofit, a business, the nonprofit starts on the energy and the passion of its founder. as has been the case with Caprice, and it gathers other people who share that sense of mission. But at some point, you sort of become this. I always characterize it as become this kind of gangly adolescent where you're doing more than you maybe have got the back end processes to keep track of. And if you're going to become a mature adult and sustainable over time, you gotta take a step back and say, what are the systems and the processes that we need to have in place so that our good work has got the infrastructure that it needs to support it? And where do we want to be in 5 years, in 10 years, and not just where we want to be, but then how are we going to get there? So I'd like to think that what I'm helping Caprice and the board and the staff do is really operationalize their strategic plan.
Gotcha. So going more into, I forget the term you just used, conflict.
Resolution.
Right. As you've grown in that area, what have you learned about that? Key points, really.
Yeah, I think there are two things that I always keep in my mind. There was a 2.5-year program. I'm sure I've forgotten more than I knew at one point, but there are a couple of things that have always stuck with me. One is that that conflict resolution is about quality of relationships. If you don't have a relationship that you care about, then conflict resolution doesn't really matter because you won't see each other again.
Mm-hmm.
So conflict is unavoidable. It's important, but it can also be a very creative process. But the things that I retain are that people typically come into conflicts with a position in mind. I must have this. I must get that. That person has to stop doing this. A real secret to conflict resolution is if you can get two people or two parties together who go beyond their position to what that underlying need is. It typically opens up a whole new set of possibilities of how to approach that conflict. So often, anger is, you scratch anger and you get underneath it, you get fear. What is that person afraid of? Are they afraid of loss of face, loss of position? Are they afraid of, like with parents and children, are you afraid of that child's welfare? That because you're angry because they have violated curfew again? But is it what's underneath their fear that they don't respect you, fear for their safety? And what's the child's the perspective when they're coming back at you with anger? What is underneath that? What is the need that they are trying to serve for independence? To be sure that you care, whatever. If two human beings or groups of human beings can connect on here's what I need and here's what I need, not here's the position that I've taken because it's the only thing I can think of that in my mind fulfills that need. If you can get to that level, it can turn out that that's where the creativity can come in. There can be all kinds of different solutions that satisfy each person's need. We typically think about, conflict as you either win, you lose, or you compromise. And that compromise is a good thing. But in conflict resolution studies, you typically learn that compromise means that nobody really got what they want. Nobody won, nobody lost, nobody's really happy with the resolution. So the idea is to sort of dig deeper and meet at that more human level of need. The other thing that I always think about with conflict resolution is the role of power. And we tend to think of power kind of in a negative way. If somebody has got power, we maybe make an assumption that they are going to misuse it, or that I can't get what I want because that person has power. There are actually all different kinds of power when you think about it. There's the power that somebody has because they have a position or a role. There's the power of having money. But there's also, Gandhi is the great example. There's power of action and power of belief. This one of the things that draws me to Real Talk and that drew me into conflict resolution was my first marriage. My husband passed away in '06, and he had been a alcoholic, suffered from mental illness. It was a really challenging relationship, and one of the things that spurred me to get into conflict resolution, because I was searching for something to do to help myself figure out, what to do, where to be. Uh, and so the power thing resonated with me because if you looked on paper, I had all the power in that relationship. I made the money, I had the steady job, I made the financial decisions. But the reality is that everything I wanted to do, dreamed of, whatever, was constrained by the power that my late husband had, which was, if you ever leave me, I will kill myself. Uh, so that's a very personal story for me about, and one of the things that, as I said, sort of, I always think of in the conversations about conflict resolution, and particularly with the role of power and how it's not always sort of what it looks like on the surface.
Yeah. First off, I'm sorry to hear about your husband and the situation that you were in, because I've heard, and I've kind of been in a situation like that before, and it's a terrible situation because it feels like you have a gun to your head, and
Right.
it's
Right.
terrible.
There's no winning move, right?
Exactly. But one question that came into my mind when you were talking about the, when you're talking about the needs of conflict, I think about all the people who are in poverty right now and don't have the understanding of that concept. And it makes me curious for what we can do for them to help them understand that concept of, if they talked more about their needs versus striving for the compromise and having so much conflict, there'd be more resolution. But I feel like there's a lack of that knowledge out there.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lack of knowledge. I think it's also requires a lot of vulnerability
Mm-hmm.
to put your needs out there. Sort of back to power. If you put your naked need out there, then you've given somebody else the power to
hurt
thwart
you.
that need,
Yeah.
right? You've exposed a vulnerability. So that position statement can be armor as much as strategy, right? Because they reject your position, it doesn't feel nearly as personal as if somebody rejects your need.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very true. I'm just thinking about, like, in in the world, how that's so common and how it's so hard to be vulnerable with people. I don't know, it makes me sad to hear about that, because there is a lot of struggle out there, and that's a real issue, and it's hard for me to think of ways to help people with that, because
Because you can't assure them that nothing bad will ever happen to them when they're vulnerable, right? Because there are people out there who will take advantage of other people. So that when you can trust and be vulnerable versus when you have to keep on that suit of armor. And that's sort of full circle. That's really where emotional intelligence can come in. And one of the things, again, that I really like about the approach of 6 seconds is that it treats them as learnable skills. So I would say that's the hope that I would offer, is that while you might not be able to kind of blindly jump and say, I'm going to make myself vulnerable, if you learn, there are 6 identified skills of emotional intelligence. And if you learn those, did I say 6? That is not right. There are 8
what's all of
skills.
them, if you don't mind me asking?
What are they? Oh
Yeah,
boy, here we go.
if you can think of them at least.
So the first is emotional literacy. And that's just being able to recognize emotions in yourself and others. There's navigating emotion. So you've recognized it. Now, do you know what to do with it? There is intrinsic motivation. So that how do you use what you know about yourself to keep moving forward to what your values are? Empathy, which is different than sympathy.
Yeah.
Empathy is really about making a space to connect with another person.
It's instead of, because sympathy is just feeling sorry for somebody, but empathy is putting yourself in their shoes, right?
Sympathy will inspire you to try to fix it.
Yeah.
Empathy is really just getting in a space where you understand where that person is coming from.
Right.
What have I left out? So there is optimism, which is another one that is sort of I misunderstood. And optimism is not about sort of always putting a smile on stuff and seeing the glass as half full. Optimism is really about seeing other possibilities. And the sort of the work around optimism is about people who. There's a great book called Learned Optimism by Seligman, and it talks. There's an assessment in there where you can. And I test as a sort of as a pessimist, which was a big surprise to me and to everyone who knows me because my husband calls me the mayor of Sunnyvale. But that people who tend toward pessimism tend to see things as permanent, pervasive, and personal. And optimists see things as temporary, environmental, and and sort of impersonal. That it's not about you. It's not going to last forever. It's not all parts of your life. And then the big one of skill is pursuing noble goals. Is really understanding. Reese talks about it a lot. Is what is your purpose?
That's the big purpose. Yeah.
Uh,
Where did you learn these? Was it at 6 Seconds?
It's there is courses. There are courses through 6 Seconds. The sort of the intro level is called Understanding EQ, and it helps you understand the skills and then kind of apply them to a particular challenge in your life. It's very much about applying stuff. So you're always, whatever you're doing with them, there's kind of a 30 or 60 or 90-day plan where here's a situation that I would like to resolve, that I would like to feel differently about in that period of time. How am I going to deploy these skills to help me get there?
Gotcha. Because I think truly, like if someone understands all those concepts, 8 of emotional
And I
intelligence.
think I left one out, but somewhere, but I don't remember which one. Yes.
That's all right. But I think understanding those tremendously helps people. And I think the first time I really heard about EQ was either here at Fountain Youth or in college. And I struggle to understand why this is the first time that I'm hearing about that. I think that information could be so useful for somebody in high school.
Emotional intelligence has a stronger correlation to success than IQ.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it empowers people.
Yeah, I mean, research bears it out time and time again and we all know people who are very, very smart but aren't people smart, right? And who end up not being as successful because they can't get things done.
Do you think then that it should be taught in high schools, would you say?
It should. I mean, it gets taught now more, except in some states. In elementary school, it gets called social emotional learning, SEL.
Yeah, I actually heard about that recently in my social policy class and how that's getting taken away in certain states.
Yeah. So SEL really shares a lot in common with EQ. It's a foundational piece of learning. So yes, I do think it should be taught.
I agree with you. I don't know why it isn't. And my next question, which you kind of already talked about it a little bit, but to expand on it, maybe it's something else. What is the hardest challenge that you've had to overcome in your life? Would you say?
My first marriage. I mean, uh, my son is 27, and I will always be grateful for, would never unwish it. But, uh, I was, see this all the time too. I was that young woman in high school and then older who was going to fix somebody, who'd had an awful life and was unhappy, and I knew that I had the power to change things. And it took me 20 years to figure out I didn't have that power.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've kind of learned recently, and I'm glad that I learned this at an early age, how you can see somebody that's hurting and you want to help them as much as you can. I think it's kind of taught here a little bit, but you can show them love, but that's really all you can do because at the end of the day, it's not your decision. What you do isn't going to change them.
Right.
They gotta
No.
choose to change them.
Yeah, it's a tough
Makes
lesson to
sense.
learn. It's one of those lessons that from the outside seems so obvious, but when you're in the situation, it's really difficult.
You want to give it your all to try to fix them, and
Yeah,
you're going to keep on facing the fact that you can't.
right. And then be willing or able to accept the consequences of your inability to do something, which was the hardest part of that situation for me. Is once I, as I said, I can't. Once I realized I couldn't do it, then I needed to be okay with what was going to happen after that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Um, would you be able to give advice to somebody that's in that situation or similar?
Well, I mean, this is what we're talking
Yeah.
about. Is you the only person you can fix is yourself. Um, I would say you never know, as people, for maybe people who know people like that, who are in that situation, is you never know when you might be the voice that makes a difference. And in my situation, um, it was my doctor who I had finally strong-armed my late husband into going to see, and she examined him and said, "Tell me, he's got a host of issues and whatever." And she went through all those, but then she turned to me and she said, "But the biggest problem is he's taking advantage of you and you're letting him." And it was like somebody threw cold water on me and woke me up.
Yeah.
So we can't always and shouldn't always horn in on other people's lives, but there might be moments that you have an opening that could really matter to somebody. So that don't ignore them.
Yeah. That's great advice, I think. Um, kind of switching subjects a little bit. Because you talked about, I forget actually what your original job was.
I was in publishing. I've been in
Publishing.
higher education publishing my career, most of my career.
Gotcha. So as you've done that and then deciding to assist nonprofits, are there any key takeaways from that time and career experience that you want to share?
Uh, well, as I said, the conflict resolution was always important to me, and so I think it's the lessons that I learned from that I took into my day job that
Mhm.
were always the most gratifying to me. Is collaborative success always feels better than individual success. Um, you don't always, and it's hard that you don't always have to be. I don't always have the best solution. Uh, Most of the time, I want to believe that I do, but you know, and that in conversation, I mean, one of the gets sort of back to that needs versus position. If you're negotiating with somebody, author contracts are always a big deal. That if you work toward understanding what that other person needs, rather than what they've come at you with, that they must have, it again, I just saw it time and time again. It opens these deeper conversations, a wider set of solutions, and it deepens the relationship because you have gotten to a place where you've had to trust each other. You've had to be vulnerable, a bit more vulnerable, maybe a bit more forthcoming and transparent than you would be otherwise, as long as you both stayed behind your shield of position. But when those positions are just butting up against each other and banging against each other, and you're not going to get past them, then if you want to go around them, you gotta get to know each other better, and that requires, some bravery.
It requires time and effort and understanding, and,
Yeah.
and it's not easy. But I think that's just life right there. And
Yeah, and like I said, it deepens relationships, and so again, it's you don't want to bring out all the conflict resolution tools for every disagreement. If you're not going to see that person again, it doesn't matter. You do the best you can. But if it's a long-term relationship that you value, if you have resolved a conflict together, your relationship is better and deeper, and you have a greater understanding of each other. So there is a value to it, but it doesn't make it easy.
yeah, I think that's the truth right there. And I actually think it's really cool how through that creating those deep relationships brings you more joy in life. And I think there's a lot of people who struggle with that because they don't have any deep relationships because of whatever situations they've been through their lives.
And we're raised in many cases, I think, to be afraid of conflict, to think of conflict as something bad, because we so often around us see conflict as having poor results, even violent results, and so people can adopt a avoidance strategy toward conflict, which then means that they're likely to get stepped on by other people who now know that they are conflict averse.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's some of the best things you can do for somebody is to help them understand how to go through conflict the right way.
Right.
Can make a tremendous difference in their lives and the way that they view the world.
Yeah, that back to the power thing. There is, there's power over, but there's also power with. If you can figure out how to share the solution, share the power with somebody else, then yeah, it's everybody wins.
So my final question for you, if you had one message for the world, what would it be?
Oh boy. I think that there's not enough empathy in the world now. With the threat that higher education is under in places, and not just because from a political perspective, but from a practical one, where everybody, and understandably, is in a hurry to be trained for a job and get that job and start making money. That and higher education has done a lot of this to itself with the rising costs and everything. But I believe there is a real loss if there's a concept called sociological imagination, which you've probably run into a social class, and I think it may be one of the single biggest losses in the trajectory we're on, where people don't have that traditional college experience where you sit around and debate big thoughts. And sociological imagination is about empathy. It's about being able to adopt somebody else's experience and worldview and to put yourself in their shoes, and to really think through what life might look like, what this particular conflict might look like to that person, to not make so often we fall into that tendencies, when it's ingrained in us, the us versus them. There's an interesting study about us versus them, but the bottom line is it is hardwired into us. And so we default to it very, very easily. And without empathy, without sociological imagination, to put to put ourselves in somebody else's position, it is so easy to vilify others um, and make ourselves feel better by having them um, put down, put away, feel less, whatever it is. And there's too much of that in the world. So I think embrace empathy would be my wish.
I agree with you completely, and I I hope that message is able to reach everybody because I think that's so true. And if everyone had empathy, a lot of problems wouldn't be what they are today. That's for sure.
Yeah, we would all pause and think before we acted in a way that could ever hurt somebody else.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, thank you, Linda, and
Thank you.
thank you for sharing everything that you did, and thank you for everything that you do for the Founding Youth.
Thanks.
This was great.